Yo, what's up guys, it's me Jake here, and today I'm going to be doing another Overrated or Not. If you watched last week, then you know I did Demon Slayer. Well, this week I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing, where's the first volume? Oh god, here it is. My Hero Academia. Now if you don't know My Hero Academia, I'll give a quick little synopsis. My Hero Academia is about a boy named Izuku Midoriya who is born in a world of quirks, but he actually does not have one. And if you're wondering what a quirk is, basically a quirk is a superpower. And he's born quirkless, and he's living in this world and he wants to become the #1 hero. And at that spot, it currently is the hero All Might, who is an insanely super strong hero with amazing quirk. And he once meets Izuku, and Midoriya asks, can you be a hero without a quirk? And then All Might shows his weak side on accident because he was damaged earlier on to the point where sometimes he can't activate his quirk and he's just a frail man, and he says no. Until later on when we meet that a sludge villain who takes over Deku's rival's body, who is Katsuki Bakugo, and All Might sees that Izuku risks himself to save this boy, even though they are rivals, and he gives his quirk down to Izuku Midoriya, and he has now a quirk, and he's trying to become the #1 hero. So that's a little bit of a synopsis of My Hero if you've not watched or read it, but I'm guessing that most people here have watched or read it, and are just waiting for my big reveal of, is it overrated or is it not? Well, if you want my big reveal, My Hero Academia is 110% overrated. Now, if you're wondering why I say that, it is because that My Hero, if you actually look at the basic shonen stories, it is pretty basic and has a pretty generic plot up until around the war arc, which is the current arc in the manga, which, if you kind of look at it, it should not take 250 chapters for a story to become non-generic. And the art is really good. I'll admit Kohi Horikoshi's art is amazing, but the characters are all pretty generic as well, all following just a similar, just one trope thing, and they all interact with each other in pretty generic and normal ways that you would expect them to. Well, not normal, but you'd expect these characters to interact the way they do, depending on their personalities, like Katsuki Bakugo and Shoto Todoroki. So you kind of see that it's not super generic, but you see these characters and the story develop in a very generic way. A villain group gets stronger, and then the main cast has to get stronger to rival this villain group. And they basically are still in high school, and they're still just trying to get their hero license. And when they do, they're just trying to be out there trying to save people. So it's basically kind of like a mix of generic shonen mixed with Marvel, and that is kind of generic, but not really. I'll say that it's a pretty good story. If you're thinking I'm just bashing it 110%, saying it's bad, I will say My Hero Academia is not a bad story. I actually think it's pretty good. I think it's probably the second best out of what people consider the new Gen Big 3, which is Black Clover, My Hero, and Demon Slayer. I think Demon Slayer is probably the weakest overall, but I definitely do think Black Clover is heads and toes over the rest. I also think Jujutsu Kaisen is also better than both of them so far, but I do think that My Hero does stand tall in a pretty good manga overall, so I'm not trying to bash it completely, but I will say that yes, the characters are generic and how they interact is a pretty generic and expected way. The development of these characters is also amazing, with Katsuki Bakugo, as he shows later on his development, and every character developing as what you wouldn't fully expect. Like, if you know the scene I'm going to be thinking about when I think Bakugo and Midoriya, when Bakugo just has this breakdown, that's just something of a character that you don't really expect of his caliber to have, but when he does have that breakdown, it is something of a something that's not expected to see of Bakugo, and it's really enjoyable to read, even though it's a really depressing part in the story where you don't expect it, and that's why it's like, wow, this is actually written, and it really does make for a good part of the story. But just because a couple chapters out of 260 something have those moments does not make it worth the hype it gets. The hype it gets is one of the biggest overall manga and animes of all time right now. Up there with Demon Slayer. Like, it was probably the most hyped up anime slash manga until Demon Slayer came out of recent generations. And do I think it deserves that hype? I do not think so at all. I think there's other series that people don't talk about at all that are actually better than it. but that's just my opinion. I definitely do think that there are stories that are like on par, if not better than it, right now that are currently serializing too. Like one would be easily, if I had to say one, it would be Twin Star Exorcist, which is entering its final arc. Another one would be like Black Clover. It would be Jujutsu Kaisen, like I said earlier. I would even put Blue Exorcist over it, but that's just my opinion, and I think that the arc that they left off on the anime is probably my favorite arc in all of Blue Exorcist, so I think that that story is really good still. But they also killed the Blue Exorcist anime, which I might make a video on in the future, but I'm not going to talk about that now. But basically, I do think it's overhyped for the reason that there are other mangas that do what they do better, which is what I think Black Clover does. And Black Clover is probably the second best battle shonen currently airing, in my opinion, other than One Piece, of course. But if you really do look at it, Black Clover has a lot of things that My Hero doesn't, that people don't talk about because they just watched the anime and dropped it because the adaptation is pretty poor and the animation is really bad for the Black Clover anime. And I already have a video about praising Black Clover and why it's not a Naruto clone. I'll leave that in the description down below. And I'm probably going to make a Greatness of Black Clover and a review on it sometime soon. So expect that in the future. But I definitely think that what My Hero is doing is not fully generic right now. I think what they're doing right now is a good turn for the story. I think their war arc is really good. I'm just currently starting to get like halfway through it. I'm not currently up to date. I'm like around halfway through the war arc right now. So I do definitely think it's definitely a very good uptick for My Hero. But do I think that this arc alone is going to make it those 250 chapters worth it? No, I don't think that's going to make it not overhyped. I definitely think that the hype is way too high for a series of this caliber. I think the reason it has this much hype is because it's a gateway anime now. It's like one of those animes that you get your friend to watch that's into Marvel and he will probably like it. And that's why it has so much hype, is the gateway anime factor. And I really don't like using the term gateway anime because I feel like any anime could be gateway anime other than like a couple like Steins Gate and like the ones you have to wait like 10 to 20 episodes to get really into. Like the Black Clover anime I say is not a gateway, but the manga could be a gateway for the manga community because it's only like 3 volumes and they're really slow enough that it gets hyped up and goes way faster pacing. But the thing about My Hero is the hype comes from that gateway factor, and it comes from Marvel fans that are getting into anime now purely because it's now becoming a bigger thing, and that people are just trying to hop on trends sometimes, and they just watch My Hero because they hear it from their favorite rapper, or they just see heroes and they want to watch it. But is that a bad thing? No, I like the community expanding. I like how we're getting more and more people into this community and seeing the growth of the otaku community. So I'm not going to bash on them, and I definitely think that fandom is pretty toxic, and I'm probably also going to make a toxicity fandom video in the future, so stay tuned for that as well. But this is definitely something that needed to be talked about because I think that everyone just doesn't want to talk about My Hero's struggles and what My Hero lacks because of how popular it is and how overhyped it is. Now, it's not a bad thing to be overhyped. Like I said in my Demon Slayer video, to be overhyped is not to be bad, it's to get more hype than it deserves. Now, am I saying this is a bad story completely just by saying it's generic? No, there's a couple of series that do generic things and do it in a way that's not bad. Like Naruto is a pretty generic story that took a lot of inspiration from Yoshihiro Togashi works, and they made it in a way that, yes, it's generic at most points, but it's not bad. It's using that generic trope and cliches and using it in a way so that it's not terrible. It's using it in a way that it's still good. So I'm not saying that just because it's overhyped or that it's doing generic things is bad. But I definitely do think that anything to do with My Hero is pretty generic, tropey, cliche, and even the humor sometimes can just be overused. Like the whole murmur, like Deku murmur stuff, like that can be overused and people still find it funny after 200 chapters, and in my mind I don't see why. But yeah, and also I think that this series is overhyped because Deku as a protagonist is a pretty crappy protagonist in my opinion, Now, I get what people are saying, like, oh, he starts off as a crybaby and then develops into a super strong hero and he doesn't cry at all. But in the first two chapters, he actually cries approximately 8 times. Now, I could give or take, because I took real time crying, like tears dripping down his face, real crying. And I didn't just account for like a tear dropping down his face. I didn't account for that because I just recently reread like what I had in volumes, and he did cry 8 times in the first 2 chapters. So that's not something that a protagonist should be doing, even if he's going for that development. And even now, he still is crying quite a bit. It's not like he just stopped crying completely. He's still crying quite a bit. Yes, it's not nearly as much as how it was in like the first 3 volumes, or like in the anime, like season 1 or halfway through season 2. It's not nearly as much, but its development through his not being a crybaby is still taking way too long. I think that maybe during season 3, they could have just stopped him being like a real big crybaby and crying during the really emotional parts, but he sometimes just cries for no reason. Like, I remember in season, I think it was at the end of season 3, when he basically just started crying because he saw Mirio's face, and I'm like, bro, why? This is just, and I just don't think that his character archetype for a protagonist is good. I think it's a pretty crappy character, like, archetyped. So that's just my opinion, though. I know people love Midoriya. I know that they think he's an amazing protagonist, but I definitely don't think he's nearly up there with like the Luffys, the Astas, the Ichigos. Like, he's not up there with them, and like the Lights, the Guts. I definitely think Guts is the best protagonist. I don't know why it took me that long to remember Guts, but I definitely don't think he's up there. I think he's pretty mid-tier, but yeah. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I hope I see you guys next time, and peace!